This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Last Monday, an ordinary school day was shattered by a single gunshot. One 16-year-old Butler High School student shot another. Bobby McKeithen would lose his life, and Jatwan Cuffey's life would be forever changed. And in that split second, the worst fears of parents, students, faculty, and staff of those attending or working in a Charlotte-Mecklenburg school were fully realized. Despite millions of dollars spent in the aftermath of other school shootings in Sandy Hook and in Parkland, Florida, it became clear the difficulty of keeping people safe in such a public environment, and it revealed holes in the security protocols in place in our schools. This hour, we've invited CMS Superintendent Clayton Wilcox to talk about what happened last Monday, what the system learned from the incident, and about guns in our schools. Clayton Wilcox, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
As I know that people will have things to ask and things to say, and you can join our conversation by emailing us at charlottetalks@wfae.org. You can get to us through Facebook or through Twitter at Charlotte Talks, and you can also watch us this morning on Facebook Live. First of all, how are the students and the staff at Butler High?
You know, I think the students are doing better. Can't say that they're back to normal. I don't know that they'll ever be back to normal. The counseling staff is there still, talking to young people. Our principal has reached out to all of his student body. He continues to be vigilant. But he's also taking care of the adults because everybody was affected by this.
Yeah, this has been a very disruptive school year with 2 hurricanes and schools closing for shelters to be opened, and now this, at least at Butler High School. Are you guys ever going to catch up?
You know, I don't really know. It's interesting to me. There's a resilience that I hadn't seen before in a number of school districts that I've been privileged to serve in. But even so, this is a large district. And, you know, while we have pockets of resilience, we have lots of places where people aren't so resilient as well.
We're going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of what happened last Monday and again on Tuesday at Garinger High School, where a gun was brought in by a student, but nothing happened. But before we do all of that, just in broad strokes, how would you assess how the situation was handled last Monday?
Well, I think within the school, the situation was handled incredibly well. Immediately after the shooting took place, within probably 10 seconds, maybe 15 at the outside, the SRO was calling the shooting in.
SRO is?
The school resource officer. Our school security associate was rendering aid to the young person. Within 30 seconds, every student in the school was in a lockdown, which meant they were in a classroom, not necessarily where their first hour was, and that's important to know.
Just any class.
Just any classroom.
They're told to go to any classroom.
Yes,
okay.
Any classroom, and they were in that classroom. Emergency responders were coming. We had a second SRO in the building within probably a minute. And then we had, within 2 or 3 minutes, just a multitude of first responders that were in that building.
How did you find out?
You know, I think the shooting took place at 7:11. At 7:14, I got a call. Our systems are that once that call for lockdown goes out, I'm immediately notified across the system. Mm-hmm. And so by 7:15, I was in my car on the way to the school.
So you can never plan for every contingency, it seems to me, and in most of the school shootings that we have seen elsewhere, it was one shooter or two, in the case of Columbine, going in and just randomly firing automatic weapons at anybody in the way. In this case, it was an altercation between 2 people, one shot the other. And he thought he'd missed. He didn't think he'd actually shot the other student. So what is supposed to happen? How do kids know? How do teachers know what is supposed to happen in all these various different situations?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I don't know that we've ever practiced or really, quite frankly, anticipated another student shooting another student during the school day. We've always kind of practiced the scenario that somebody from the outside, maybe
right.
somebody with a tie to the school, would come in and begin to do really the unthinkable, that evil of shooting other students or shooting at faculty. So we'd practice that. We work hard on that. And in fact, the Butler High team had practiced that just the week before. A shooter coming in. And quite frankly, I think that's why they responded so quickly.
And when you say team, does it include the students?
That's all the students. That's all of the teachers. That's all the support personnel.
So you're doing these like fire drills?
Unfortunately, we are today. We require every school does lockdown training.
And I know that when I was in school and we did these fire drill practices, after the third, maybe the second or third or fourth one, it was kind of like a party atmosphere. You knew it was a drill, and you got out of the classroom and you filed out onto the playground or the parking lot or wherever, and everybody was talking. Is this taken more seriously, these shooter drills?
I think the active survival training is taken much more seriously than, say, the fire drill or the inclement weather drills that we do. Kids know these are a matter of life and death. They've seen too many of them across the country.
Okay. A decision was made to move students from that lockdown into a quote-unquote regular class schedule following the shooting. You have strongly defended the Butler High School principal's decision to move those students from lockdown to second period. Explain why that was the right thing to do.
Well, I think it's the right thing to do for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, we had to know where all of our kids were. We had to make sure that no one else was in harm's way or had been a participant in some way, and so we had to get them to their second-hour class. I will tell you from moment one, there was no instruction going on at school. People were in fear for their life. I've heard kids say that they were in prayer. I've heard kids say that they were calling or texting mom or dad. I've heard kids say that they simply huddled in fear and worried what was going to happen next, because 200-plus kids actually heard a shot go off. This was not a drill in any of the kids' mind or thoughts.
So later in the day, Butler PE teacher Van Barkley posted an explanation of the decision to move to second period on his Facebook page.
This was not done so we could resume a normal school day, as many of you have heard. We did not teach yesterday. We did not test yesterday. Instead, we moved our students to second block so we could account for where they were. Teachers are there for their students to provide any support that they needed. We mourned together. We reflected together. We were there for each other.
Why did it take an individual teacher to post that on Facebook to explain to people who were irritated by this? They saw it differently. They didn't understand what was really going on. They just thought, well, they're going to class? Why did it take an individual teacher to explain that to people?
I wish I could answer that, because we had talked about it earlier in the day. We talked about it at a press conference. We talked about it with anybody who would listen, quite frankly. But because some young people tweeted out certain things, I think the community embraced some of the rumors, and I think that's one of the things that we as a system are struggling with right now is how do we have our message cut through the noise that's created with social media that may or may not be factually oriented? How do we break through that? And then, there are people who are not big CMS fans, and I get that. But how do we make sure that we're the trusted voice in that, as opposed to, they're just covering for themselves?
You mentioned that it was just the day before or the week before that Butler High School students and staff went through.
I believe it was the week before. It might have been 2 weeks.
The active shooter drill, so that prepared them pretty well. But of course, the parents don't go through those active shooter drills, and they seem to be a little of course they'd be upset. They didn't know exactly how to act in the face of that. And some of them took matters into their own hands and crossed the street and went up to the school. Could you have anticipated that reaction by parents?
I don't know that we could have prior to it happening. We'll never make the mistake again of not anticipating parents who want to get with their kids right away. But quite honestly, I don't know how to reconcile the issue of there's a shooter on the campus, kids get locked down, and then me knowing where they are. I have no eyes within the classroom. And quite frankly, at the time, the office staff is so overwhelmed with some of the logistical kinds of concerns. It's not as if we had time then to go and ask for roll. We also had an active crime scene, so we couldn't walk through the halls. We're going to look at could we use our intercom systems differently and have people check in. We're going to look at a number of things like that. But when you're talking about a student body of 2,000 to 3,000 kids, doing that kind of check-in is really very, very difficult.
Did the Matthews Police Department, were they able to keep they were not able to keep the parents across the street? The parents broke through the police lines?
I don't know that I would describe it as they broke through the police line. I think the Matthews Police Department did everything that they could do, but they stopped short. They realized that, there's just no utility in stopping a mom who's going to be with her child. I mean, how would they do that? Would they tase the mother and put her on the ground? There's just no way. There was a bit of a mentality that took over, and I think they made the right decision by letting people
Could parents get into the building?
They could not get into the building because our buildings are locked and secured.
Right.
It was really a difficult situation, though, because we had several hundred people kind of banging up, wanting to come in the school to get to their kids. We had several hundred kids inside who wanted to get out because they were talking via social media, via their cell phones. It was really, for a moment, there was a pandemonium that really wasn't good for anyone. First responders couldn't do their job. We couldn't do our job. People who were doing their job were diverted from their job in terms of the investigation, in terms of securing kids.
Has this happened before in other school districts around the country where something like this has happened?
It has. I mean, one of the things that I think first responders and school officials will talk about is how do you kind of find that balance between support. Look at Columbine. One of the things that they said early on, one of the first school shootings, is emergency responders couldn't get there because parents had clogged the roadways. Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't get ambulances in right away. They couldn't get some of the police cars in right away. In our case, it wasn't as horrific as all that, but some of that was just the same. I mean, the reason they couldn't come to Butler originally is because the police had closed the street in front of Butler High School, and that's where the police diverted them to Elevation's parking lot.
Right. Did parents know, did police know at the time the parents were trying to get to their children, did they know that it was clear to go in, that it was safe to go in, or were they in the dark about whether or not a shooter had been apprehended at that point?
I think many parents will say they were in the dark. There were a number of social media posts, not just by us, but also by the Matthews Police Department. But I can't really say what was in the mind of one of the parents. I know that at some point, I saw on the news parents saying, my son or daughter said they're okay, but I still want them. I'm going to get them.
Yeah. So clearly this is a problem, not just for you. It's a problem for law enforcement. It's a problem for public safety. What do you say to a parent who is quite clearly and justifiably concerned about their children, about the need to stay away until police and others can do their jobs and secure the location so that everybody is safe, not just the kids, but everybody, including the parents?
Well, I think that's what you just have to say. You have to say it repeatedly. But I also know that, we've done some of our after-action review, and one of the things that we know we could have done as a school system is been perhaps better at communicating. We should have done something every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, as opposed to we had an hour gap in time, and that left a void to be filled by kids and social media.
Yeah, we have a Twitter comment from one of the Butler parents who marched on the school, and they said, I didn't organize because we weren't getting information. I'm sure this is not phrased properly, but I didn't organize the march because we weren't getting information. It was because we were asked to leave our children in school, a school that CMS police failed to keep a gun out of. But as far as non-communication with parents, who is responsible for the failure?
I think we are. I think we should have done a better job of communicating, but we were caught in the moment. We were trying to secure the facility. We were trying to make sure that the police had access to all the resources that they need during the time frame. I fully accept the responsibility for not having more communications with our parents, but quite frankly, would ask for a bit of grace in the sense that this was new territory for all of us. It wasn't something that we'd anticipated.
Clayton Wilcox is superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. We have a lot to talk about as we go through the remainder of the hour. And once again, as I said, you can email us, Facebook, Twitter us, tweet us rather, and get your questions answered. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, working every day to transform the health system for all North Carolinians. More at todaywe.com. And Duke Energy, investing in technology designed to modernize the Carolinas energy grid over the next 10 years. More at duke-energy.com/future. Election Day is tomorrow. We check in with Mecklenburg County Elections Director Michael Dickerson on this program to talk about turnout and the integrity of the vote and more. And then later on in the program, CMPD Chief Kerr Putney is looking to get a head start on engaging you in preparing for any protests or violence that could arrive with the tens of thousands of people coming here for the 2020 Republican National Convention. And we'll also be talking more about keeping guns out of schools, both tomorrow on this program at 9.
For millions of Americans, this year has felt as politically intense as last year. How might historians mark this moment in our history? On the eve of the midterms, we'll take the long view with America's historian-in-chief, Pulitzer Prize winner Doris Kearns Goodwin, on these turbulent times, next time on 1A.
1A coming up from 10 to noon, right after Charlotte Talks. Here on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Clayton Wilcox is here. He's the superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, and we're talking about the shooting last Monday at Butler High School. You've said that that what happened with parents revealed some access control issues that you didn't know you had before. You've also said that the system wasn't clear enough in its wording to settle parents down. This is the first time that's ever happened at a Charlotte-Mecklenburg school. And you think that you have everything set up, but you can't anticipate every single eventuality, and there was no way to anticipate that parents would walk or march into a situation that could have been dangerous for themselves because of their eagerness to get to their children. In hindsight, what should you have said? What could you have said to better control that part of the situation?
I think one of the things that we could have done, and what most people probably don't know, is that part of the reason for the long delay in communications is because I, the principal, several of the folks who were important in messaging were setting up the dismissal process so that we could get kids out. We actually had what we used blue emergency cards on a cart. It was out front of the school. We were pulling police cars away when the parents came up. I think most parents who were there would understand that. But what people also don't understand, and we haven't communicated, is when you go into a lockdown, kids don't go to their assigned first-hour class. They go to the first place where they can be secure. Much what the principal, or what the PE teacher was saying, we didn't know where kids were. And in order to start an orderly dismissal, we had to get them there. So when we called for second hour, at the bottom of that it said kids were returning to class, I think parents assumed, because we weren't clear that we were getting them there for identification purposes, that we were just going to start school. Even some kids tweeted out to their moms and dads, and I think that's what really irritated people, is that we were going to proceed with school as normal after there'd been a shooting. And I think that angered a lot of parents.
So when you go to second period after this shooting, you're doing this so that essentially you can take the role and account for people and their whereabouts.
So when mom and dad come up, we know where their child is. Could you imagine if the parents came up and said, I want my son or daughter, Maurice or Tal, whoever it is, and we said, well, just a minute, we can't find them.
Panic.
That would be a huge panic.
Right.
But I don't think the community knew that when you go into a lockdown, kids are all over, particularly when, and here's what made it unique, kids weren't in class yet. This was before school began. If we go into a traditional lockdown, the kids are in class already. We know where they are.
Right.
But this case was really different, and that's something we didn't anticipate either.
Shortly after the shooting, you told the media that the incident, quote, began with bullying that escalated out of control and fear took over. A young person brought a gun to solve a problem. How do you know that bullying was involved, and do you still believe that?
Well, first of all, I have to, kind of dodge my answer a little bit because the police have asked me to refrain from commenting on that because they're involved in an investigation. Okay. But what I can say is when I made the comment initially, it's because I was aware of some things that were going on prior to the school day. Over the weekend, there were some things that happened. Most people who have been following us know what that is because they've saw it.
How did you know it?
Because right away, once kids started talking, it came out.
Okay. The parents of Bobby McKeithen have said, and he's the young man who lost his life, have said that the schools should have done more to head off the fight and to warn him, the father, also named Bobby McKeithen, to warn him and his wife that a situation was brewing. You say now that people knew about it, you knew about it because kids were talking about it, but was there any way for the school system, for teachers, for faculty, for staff, for you, to know about this altercation on a Friday night in front of a Harris Teeter in a parking lot that would filter over into the school day on Monday morning at 7-Eleven?
I don't think so, and I want to be clear about the timeline. I didn't know, nor did the principal or any of the staff know about what took place at Harris Teeter. until kids started talking after the shooting, after some kids who were close to what took place came down to the office and began talking with people. That's when information filtered out to me. So there was no opportunity, I believe, for the school system to anticipate something happening before school.
Had this happened at a football game, would you have known? Would you have been able to do something? Would you have done something?
Well, we would have done something had it happened at a football game, particularly if CMS PD or other law enforcement had been engaged or involved in it. But in this case, we didn't know because, I mean, how would we? It was something that happened in the larger community.
The shooter, Jatwan Cuffey, surrendered peacefully to police after he ran to his math teacher's class and told the teacher that he had a gun in his book bag. Have you spoken to that teacher about their interaction between her and the student?
I've not spoken directly to the teacher, but I have spoken to teachers in the math department. You know, it was a really tough day for all of them. But I think what was important is the math teachers clearly said, as I talked to them that day, that it was the relationships of the teachers at Butler with their kids that they believe stopped even further tragedy.
I suppose it speaks highly of that math teacher that he would come to her after such a traumatic moment in his life.
I think it does because as you know, kind of the story gets out now, the first thing he said is, "You're going to be mad at me. I did something really bad." For a young person who had just shot someone, to make a comment like that says there is a relationship there that I think is strong.
Why haven't you talked to the math teacher?
You know, right now it's been a really incredibly traumatic thing for most of the folks. And I just thought, you know, it's best for me to give it some time before I go back and do some things. We are talking about how we honor both the principal, who I think was brilliant during this time frame, and we'll talk about that teacher as well. You know, Mike, I'd share something else with you because I saw in the newspaper this weekend there was a comment made that I didn't attend the funeral of this young man who passed away.
I've got one right here. I'm a bit surprised the emailer says not to see the superintendent or any school board members at Saturday's funeral. I'd be curious to know how that came about. The Butler principal was there, made a lovely comment, but no one representing the district in its first ever fatal shooting in the school.
Well, and I want to address that. That's kind of where I was going before you read the question. You know, I saw some of the social media stuff about the comments around bullying, and I just really didn't want to be there and be a distraction and have somebody who came and said, you know, you said something that wasn't true. I didn't think that would have dignified the young man. I didn't think it would be in the best interest of the family. So I made a hard decision to not attend. But also, I will tell you, I think in retrospect, it was the right thing for me not to attend that funeral. I will make contact with the family at some point, but I think right now, as the investigation unfolds and the facts, it's probably best for me to stay away.
Jerry on Twitter writes, the kids had phones. They could have let their parents know they were safe, and the administration could have asked students to tell their parents to stay calm. Any thought about that?
Well, I think if you watch some of the coverage, even when kids did say, "I'm okay, I'm just scared," some of those parents actually came over anyway because they want to be. And I understand that. You know, I have 2 children myself. If they were caught in something like this, I know I'd want to go. But I hope that what I would do is say, I'll go now that I know you're safe when it's safe to go.
Yeah. Greg on Facebook writes, would CMS consider inviting parents to see an active shooter drill? It seems to be beneficial to have parents understand what happens to the kids during a situation, but also what parents should do during a shooting.
I think that's one of the things that we will do. You know, we've done a number of active survival training things. One of the things that I've talked to Chief Kirputney about is videoing and filming that so that parents can see it online. I'm not sure that parents seeing it as it takes place in the school is the best thing, but I wouldn't even rule that out right now. I think we've got to look at all things.
Security at all CMS schools has been beefed up twice in recent years, and most recently following the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida last year. Millions of dollars have been spent, but clearly they haven't been able to stop guns from finding their way onto school campuses. You said that one of the things this taught you is that despite those security precautions, they are, quote, after action, a term I'd never heard before, but I understand it. You say they don't stop the intruder from getting in. In this case, the intruder was a student. He was supposed to be there. Would things have been different had this been an outsider?
You know, I first of all, I don't know that an outsider would have been able to get as far into the school as this young student did, because you have adults by every doorway. You have our police officers manning some of the doorways. You have our school security associates manning doorways. I think somebody who doesn't belong there is going to be picked out. There is a chance, however, if they have a gun, they're coming in anyway. But that's the debate right now. How hard do you make a school to get into? Do you harden it with an airport-style security? I don't know that we can do that given the way our campuses are laid out. There are multiple buildings. There are portables attached to them. How do you stop kids going in and out? Do you put metal detectors at every doorway? That's just something we're struggling with right now.
Let's talk about how that gun got into Butler, because the very next day a gun was found at Garinger High School. CMS does not check every book bag. No. You have not installed metal detectors. We'll talk about why. CMPD Chief Kerr Putney has recommended, evidently several times, the wanding of everybody who enters a school building, and CMS thus far has declined to do so. Why?
Well, there are a dozen reasons, but probably the first one has been just the sheer volume of kids coming in and out of school, not just at the beginning of school, but throughout the day. That's part of what I was saying earlier. When you get on one of our high school campuses, or even many of our middle school campuses, between secondary buildings and between portable classrooms, there are so many points of entry. Would you want at every one of those? Because one of the things that you heard in this last thing is the young man went to the woods to get his gun. Now, that was before school. But what would stop a young person from placing a gun in between portables and then going through our wanding, through our school security, and then once they were in class, stepping out of class?
In that situation, how would they get the gun on campus? He'd have to be wanded to get on campus initially anyway.
Well, not necessarily, because if you think of our campuses, our campuses aren't fenced. They don't have like a double line of fence, so they could come on over the weekend. They could put it under a portable. They could come on before they actually went through the security line. There are just a lot of things that we have to think. I'm not here to say we're not going to do some of these things. I am here to say that a lot of people are offering solutions that they believe are simple and straightforward, and they're not.
Has this back-to-back incident of Butler last Monday with a shooting and Garinger on Tuesday with a gun on campus that was not fired, has that changed your point of view? Has it sped up a timetable of given a sense of urgency to finding other solutions to this?
I don't know that anything could have sped it up from where we were given the loss of a life on a campus the Monday before, but it certainly added urgency to the conversations that we're having right now. And I think it's causing us to look deeper at different solutions, things that we had rejected before. I think you will see us have a conversation around, if we can't do metal detectors at doorways, can we do wands? Can we do random inspections? Could we move to clear plastic bags? But then that invites the question of, well, what about baggy clothes, coats, hats, things like that, where you can put a weapon under? So we're just going to have to think about that.
Butler is a big high school. When the school opens in the morning, does everyone come in through a single point of entry?
No, they don't. They come through multiple points of entry. We'd like to think that all the kids come through the front door, because that's where the great majority of our security is. It's the central hallway. It's the commons. It's the pathway that takes them to the cafeteria if they want to have breakfast. But I do know this, that other kids stand by side doors and will pop a door open for a friend that comes in. So there are all kinds of things to do. We don't have faculty that would be by every single door every single day.
And you can't lock an exit door because that's a fire hazard.
You can't lock it from being open from the inside.
Exactly. So you can't stop a student, one person opening the door for another, even though you want everybody to come in. Now, Kerr Putney has suggested in the past that all schools in the district restrict their entry point to one entry point in the school. That has not been done, obviously. Will it be done now? Is it feasible to do at a school the size of Butler? Because as you say, you may say you have to come in the front door, but if Johnny wants to open the door for Phil,
well,
he will.
Yeah, let me give you an example, and maybe two entry points. Again, I'm not going to reject any solution right now. But we have to separate the car traffic from the bus traffic. We have to separate walker traffic from other traffic. So that automatically means that you're going to have multiple entry points because the buses are going to pull up in one lot. They're going to drop kids off. They're going to come in. But you also have your car and your walkers are coming in another point. So you have a second doorway.
But why? I mean,
Because big buses and cars don't mix.
well, I understand that, but can't they walk from one area to the open? I mean, if the buses pull over here on the right side of the school and the cars come on the left side of the school, can't they all walk and converge to the main entrance? That's what we did when I was in school. We're only allowed to go in the main entrance.
I don't know, Mike.
I don't think we ever thought about going in the side entrances, but I'm sure people did.
I went to school then probably before you in a high school, but we found ways into school that didn't take us past the principal every day. But, I guess what I would say is, one of the other concerns that we have is how do we, once kids come on a campus, how do we make sure, we owe the parents this, that we make sure that they go to class. Yeah. If all of a sudden you're saying to kids, I need you to walk, 1,000 feet or 400, 500 yards around a school, then I've got to have perimeter control. I've got to have either adults who are out there to make sure that kids don't just, I got off the bus, now I'm just going to go to McDonald's for a while. Because all of our campuses are open, they're in larger communities. Part of the reason we go from point A to point B is because we have this concept of in loco parentis, which really means that we have responsibility for your kids once they get on the bus, and some might argue from the bus stop to school and to home again. So we try to eliminate places where kids of their own volition can walk off and go another way. That's why we separate buses and cars and try to have the most immediate points of entry.
So if there was money for this, if you could install multiple metal detectors in schools, or if you could wand every single person that came into a school, what would the impact of that be?
Well, I think the first impact would be time. Would that time come away from the instructional day, or would we have our buses come earlier? We get a lot of grief right now that our buses are rolling too early in the morning, but to get 2,000 kids in a building, I would imagine it's going to take us an extra 15 to 20 minutes if we're just wanding, if we're doing some backpack searches, things like that. Do we start early? Do we give up some instructional time? Those are questions that we're going to have to answer in the next few days.
According to the Charlotte Observer, several studies have shown that metal detectors at schools have a negative impact on students' perception of safety and increase their sense of disorder at the school. Those same studies show that metal detectors can have a negative impact on student performance, especially at already struggling schools. Do you believe that? And if you do, what could possibly be the correlation between having a metal detector and students feeling less safe?
I've not actually read the studies, but just my gut tells me that kids who have to walk through metal detectors might feel that the school is actually less secure, that we're keeping people out who would otherwise do them harm. I would imagine then fear plays into those studies, but I've not seen those studies. I did read them, and they resonated with me.
In the aftermath of the shooting in Parkland, Florida, I believe Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School passed a rule that students could only bring in clear or see-through backpacks for their books, etc. Do you know from people at Parkland whether or not that is feasible for you to do, or whether it really makes a difference? Because you mentioned baggy clothes and things like that, where other weapons could be hidden.
I don't know the answer to has it made a difference in that school district. I do know the superintendent. He's somebody that I'll reach out to. I've actually looked, however, personally at the clear plastic bags. They range in price from $14 to $15, and that's not, I think, an unreasonable expense to protect our kids.
Okay. Clayton Wilcox is here. We have more ground to cover with regard to guns in schools, and we're coming right back with more at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Tom Bush Law Group, offering legal advocacy and a devotion to family law solutions that protect the client's best interests in the midst of life-changing decisions. For over 30 years, TomBushLaw.com. And the North Carolina Turnpike Authority, offering NC Quick Pass transponders for automatically paid tolls when using the I-77 express lanes between Mooresville and Uptown. Details at ncquickpass.com. WFAE.com. Coming up in 20 minutes on 1A, the day before election edition of the program, a quick look ahead to the midterms, and then Joshua Johnson is joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning author and historian Doris Kearns Goodwin to talk about her new book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, and about how our tumultuous political climate compares with those from the nation's past. That's coming up at 10 o'clock on 1A, and we'll continue our conversation in 30 seconds.
WFAE's election night coverage will include a panel of experts discussing both the races and the state constitutional amendments. We're also inviting you to join the discussion by calling in. Hi, I'm David Borax. I'll be joined by former state lawmaker Malcolm Graham and former Charlotte Council member Edwin Peacock for Democratic and Republican analysis, and we'll talk with political scientist Susan Roberts of Davidson College. Our election night special coverage starts at 7 p.m. on 90.7 WFAE and WFAE.org.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, Clayton Wilcox, is with us today to talk about all the concerns surrounding the shooting last Monday at Butler High School and the fact that the very next day, a gun was brought into a school, Garinger High School. Michael emails, the superintendent keeps saying that they were caught by surprise, or this is not something they expected. Why? School shootings are unfortunately becoming more and more common, and this is our new reality. All educators and administrators should expect this to happen in their schools in this new reality until something changes.
Well, first, this isn't the new reality. I mean, it can't be the new reality. It's something that's happened all too frequently. But when you look at the thousands and thousands of schools across this nation, it isn't happening every day for people. I would say this, we anticipate that somebody's going to come in from the outside. We practice and drill against that every day. Somewhere in the system, somebody's thinking about that, talking about it, I'm thinking about it. A school shooting didn't surprise me. What surprised me is another student shooting another student in the school. That's not what's been the norm in these school shootings. And that's really what caught us not anticipating.
In the spur of the moment. Where students have shot other students, it was planned out in advance.
Absolutely, and people should have known. But this was a case where it almost felt spontaneous to us, and that surprised us. So, to the person who wrote in, I'm not naive. I do this for a living. I understand. This is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night as a school superintendent shooting. So I wasn't surprised in the sense that we had a shooting. I really thank my lucky stars every day. We don't have more. We had 17 guns on our campus in the previous year. That's more than our share of students by percentage, absolutely.
So that's a new figure, the 17. I was going to ask you about this because CMS has a gun problem, and we've known about this for years. The system has long been reported, and this happened long before you came here as superintendent. CMS has reported more guns on school grounds than any other district in North Carolina for years. It accounts for 20% of the guns reported on school grounds in the state, despite having just 10% of the state's enrollment of students. 19 guns found on the grounds in the 2016-2017 school year. The Observer asked for last year's and couldn't get it. You just said it was 17. Is that last year?
I think that's the number that I saw reported as last year. I'll double check that and get back to you. But my point is this: in all of those, they were either reported by other students or by adults who other students went to. So in many ways, I think kids understand the harm that guns bring. This was one of those things where we didn't have that kind of actionable intelligence. And that's another thing that caught it. We maybe had gotten a bit complacent in that kids would tell us, and we didn't have some of the upfront active searching, if you will.
I think we're the second largest system in the...
Yeah. We're the second largest in the system behind Wake.
So why don't they have this problem to the degree that CMS? What is it about Charlotte? And I'm not blaming Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. What is it about Charlotte that has caused CMS to have more guns in schools than any other system in the state?
Well, first of all, I thank you for not blaming CMS, but I think one just has to look around. I think when you look at like the Leading on Opportunity Council, why was that formed? It came out of the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, into the Chetney study, and all these other things that are going on in broader Charlotte. My sense is there are just more social ills here, and that hurts me to say, as a new member of the community who moved here purposefully, not just for a job, but because we like the Charlotte area. But I think we have some issues that we absolutely have to take care of. The fact that kids say to me that it's easier for them to get a gun in some communities than it is to get to the library is scary.
Wow. So how many guns have been reported at CMS this year?
This year I don't have that number that I'm able to release right now, but I believe...
It's bigger than 2, right?
It is bigger than 2. I believe we have suspended or expelled 4 other kids, so I would think we're under 10 right now.
How have you found those guns?
Again, students telling us.
How did you find the gun at Garinger?
The gun at Garinger, I believe, was reported by another student.
Will it turn out, do you think, that somebody at Butler knew that the shooter had the gun?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know this, that when I reviewed the security tapes, I saw the young man who had the gun talking to 2 or 3 of his friends, but that's part of the investigation that's ongoing.
That you can't talk about. Katie on Facebook writes, money would be well spent on licensed mental health clinicians to be available in every school to support both students and staff, providing mental health education and support to reduce the stigma and address problems such as bullying, suicide, drug abuse, trauma, etc. Hasn't money been appropriated for that? Don't we have more than we had before?
We do have more, but the ratio that we have now to students and counselors is still far outside the norm. I think the other thing that I would say, the hard reality of this is that people who need help are usually the last people that think they need help. And so, somebody who is really struggling and might be thinking about taking their own life, they're not going to seek out the counselor. So we need better systems to kind of intervene, to know when people are hurting and to know when people need that help. And then we've got to be more aggressive in offering it.
The president and others have suggested that schools would be safer if teachers and other staff members were armed. In what happened at Butler High School on Monday, had teachers had firearms, had the principal, had the staff, had guns, what do you think? How would they have used them? What would they have done? What could have happened?
Well, first of all, it happened so fast. When you watch the video, no one would have had time to shoot the shooter, if that's what people think would have solved this. I would just simply say, I don't think adding guns to an already volatile situation, more guns, makes a great deal of sense for us. I understand there are people out there who believe that different than I do. But we have trained armed security at all of our high schools and most of our middle schools. SROs, people who make their living doing this work. I trust them to keep us safe.
And the fact that you have trained armed security at every school speaks volumes about what the hell is wrong with this country.
It absolutely does.
And I hate to, it just makes me so angry because this is not a school problem. You should not be sitting here talking about this. This is not a school problem. This is a societal problem.
I think it absolutely is. What I said earlier, where kids tell me it's easier to buy a gun than get to the library, that's not a school district problem. That's a problem within our community.
But when teachers and principals and you talk to students, who are the ones in most cases who are bringing these weapons into schools, does the message that guns are not a solution, that you don't bring a gun to a fist fight, does that message get lost somehow? Does it even click with some people because of what they experience in their neighborhoods, what they experience sometimes in their homes? Does it get through, or is that just something that's something that schools can't do?
I think with 95, 98% of our kids, and I'm throwing a percentage of them, but the great, great majority of our kids, they understand that guns aren't a solution. They do. We're a school district where we have 150,000 kids. We have about 40,000 kids in our high schools. The great majority of those kids understand they're not solving their problems with guns. Even if they get in a fight, they're using their fists. A lot of people talk to me. I was with a group at a breakfast club, and it was a really reasonable conversation. But there were a lot of people who said, well, we used to solve our fights with our fists, even though there were guns in the cars. And I would imagine they're referring to hunting weapons. We didn't go get them.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's not what our society glorifies today. Look at the video games where people get shot and they just respawn. I think kids see that and think, well, this gun isn't as bad. A small fraction of kids think that.
Yeah.
I think the fact that, you see shows where people shoot each other to solve their problems, those messages are hard for all kids to overcome. And if you're a little bit kind of, maybe struggling with a lot of reality-based issues, maybe you're going to that message resonates with you.
Yeah. How much money has CMS spent on improving security?
If you go back to the earlier initiatives after Sandy Hook, I believe, and maybe the previous school shooting, probably $20 million, maybe $24 million.
How much is Wake County and Guilford County and Robeson County? How much have they spent on schools?
I think we're all spending in the neighborhood of millions of dollars. That doesn't even include the money we're spending on school resource officers. It costs me almost $7 million a year to have school security in terms of the professionally armed police officers.
And if you had that $20 million that you could pour into education, what would it buy?
More counselors, more social workers, more teachers in really critically different areas where kids maybe need that extra help, smaller class sizes, things like that.
And if you went to the legislature, in the absence of the $20 million that has been spent on school security, if you just went to them and said, we need $20 million for all the things that you just mentioned, what are the chances you'd get it?
Not very good.
But we're willing to spend $20 million on hardening schools and making them like prisons if we could. We can't, but if we could, we would. We're willing to spend that money for that.
I think a lot of folks who are in positions of responsibility would say spending that as a one-time cost. We can do that with rainy day funds or other things. And they're willing to do that as opposed to either passing new taxes or changing priorities.
So you have said that parents bear some responsibility in this to notice changes in the behavior of their kids, which is the other side of the coin in which the parents of the young man who lost his life, Bobby McKeithen, said you should have told them that something was going on with their children before this incident happened. I'm not sure what my question is here, but because it seems on the face of it that parents, and I've said this before, so I'll say it again, parents are the problem.
I don't know that parents are the problem, but I will say this.
If you don't know what your child is doing, if you don't know that your child has access to a gun, you're the problem.
I think there's some truth to that, Mike. I really do. If you don't know who your kids are hanging out with, if you don't know the kinds of things they're doing at a Harris Teeter parking lot on a Friday night, that's a problem for all of us. And, I understand that some parents say, you know what, I work really hard. I've got 2 jobs. Or, I can't keep track of my kids all the time. The unfortunate reality is when you don't know what your kids are doing, that's not a good thing for any of us.
And, of course, kids are not going to come to mom or dad and say, hey, I have a gun in the woods. They're not going to say that.
No, but you have to know that your child has changed a little bit. I have a hard time believing that a child who has a weapon in the woods or a child who has a knife or something, whatever it may be.
Teenagers by nature become sullen.
Well, I think
and they don't talk to their parents.
I think they do, but you know what? You got to see that there's a hostility there that isn't normal. You got to see that there's an anger there that isn't normal. And when you see that, you got to ask for help. And whether that's asking the school system to provide help or whether it's asking somebody in your faith community to provide help, I think you've got to ask. I think parents have to be accountable for their children. But I'm not blaming any of the parents in this.
Is this as big a wake-up call to Charlotte, what happened on Monday of last week? Should this be as big a wake-up call as the Keith Lamont Scott shooting and the unrest that followed?
Well, I hope it doesn't produce the unrest in terms of the violence, but I think a life is a life. I think it should produce a lot of anxiety, a lot of unrest in the sense that we won't settle for another one. I think we've got to make sure that parents are talking to each other. They're demanding more of us. We're demanding more of ourselves. I think the legislative delegation in this community ought to be saying, how can we help in material ways, not just with prayers and thoughts.
Have they come to you?
I actually have met with the delegation, and they have expressed an interest in helping, and I believe that they will. One of the neat things, Mike, that I saw was this was a nonpartisan issue. I met with our delegation, Republicans and Democrats, and not one of them postured. They all said, how do we stop this?
During the recent hurricanes, some of the schools opened their gyms, et cetera, as shelters for people who were driven from their homes. And because of that, you closed those schools to students for security purposes. Tomorrow is Election Day, and a lot of schools are used as polling places. Mm-hmm. Any security concerns about that?
We do have some. So we've done a lot of work making sure that the voting locations are segregated from the traditional population where kids are. We have redeployed all of our security associates so that we have 70-some people in our polling places, and we have worked hard with CMS PD to make sure that we are active and we're visible on our campuses. So we've done a lot. But we've also requested the calendar committee for future elections make it a non-student attendance day. So we'll be looking at that.
Do you have any, it's been a tough week, do you have any final words that you'd like to say to students, parents, faculty, staff about safety or about what happened last Monday and again on Tuesday with the gun being found at Garinger?
I think what I would say to parents is that we are our first and primary concern is the safety of their kids. We have invested millions of dollars. We have invested time and energy in training. We had a horrible mishap, but it's not typical of CMS. It's not typical of what we do. We need parents in this community to not abandon the schools, but to become closer to the schools, because I really do believe that a strong public school system is central to our republic. It's central to our democracy. It makes all the sense in the world for us to go to school together. It may be one of the last great social institutions, and so stick with us. Mike, one clarification. There were 9 guns on campuses last year. 9, not 17, and we're going to follow up with that.
Okay. Clayton Wilcox is superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. Thanks for the hour. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.